So next, we're going to look in a little bit more detail at the key learning from this project. I'm going to ask Briege Nugent to join me on the screen now. Hi, Briege. So Briege is an independent consultant who has plenty of experience working with participatory evaluation, and who's been instrumental in producing Life as We Know It. Briege is going to look in more depth at the benefits of peer research and kind of what those key messages are for others who are thinking about their own participatory evaluation projects. So over to you, Briege.
Thank you so much, Celeste, and thank you, Life Changes Trust, for inviting us to do this today. It's a real privilege. So that's a bit about me and my involvement. I'm now going to talk a bit about the Life as You Know project, and firstly, I'll talk about the key findings. So I think probably one of the top key findings is that actually supporting the involvement of people's lived experience needs to be done ethically, and with an emphasis on inclusion. And Celeste highlighted about ethics of care, and that's really just about being sensitive. It's about thinking about people's needs in advance. And it's about promoting enablers to engagement. So even right from the very start, Media Education talked through about how they would help support people into recruitment, because it's actually quite difficult to get people recruited onto the project. So it was about thinking through the practicalities of getting people to interviews, which back then they were physical interviews. Travel expenses, do they want to have somebody along with them? Do they want to have somebody sitting in with them that they know even during the interview? Just all those wee small steps that actually make things actually physically possible for people to take that step forward to get involved. We also found that actually doing the recruitment through trusted networks was really beneficial, and actually keeping that conversation going with trusted networks throughout the project was really beneficial too, particularly because we were going through a pandemic throughout all of this. The involvement of people with lived experience in evaluation remains rare. And this project, I think, highlights that that should not be the case, but also just what Celeste had said from the very outset, that there's this very academic sense of what peer research is, and it's that they're involved right from the very start, right the way through. But actually, what we found is not only is that not realistic for some people, but actually they don't want to be involved in every aspect of the project. So, for example, lo and behold, I found that not everybody on the team wanted to help me do any coding of the interviews, which guess what? That's actually not the most exciting task as a researcher. So, it's just these type of things that actually made us realize that the all or nothing approach that, if you want, academia has towards peer research isn't actually that realistic if you really want to be inclusive. Involving people with lived experience is not just an ethical or nice thing to do, but has real benefits, and I'll talk to those now in a wee minute. And the last point, which also Celeste emphasised, and I'm sure Media Education would shout from the rooftops, is that the arts offers a fun and creative way for people to articulate their stories and have a platform to be heard. And that's not a new finding, but I think for evaluations and for participatory evaluations and peer research, arts is probably an underused asset, and actually definitely should be something people consider in the future. So those are some of our key findings. I'll now talk a little bit about the benefits of peer research and participatory evaluation. So one of the top things, I suppose, if you are taking an ethical stance as this, is having voices of people with lived experience involved throughout the processes means that you're flattening the power disparities between those doing research and those being researched. And you'll have seen from, Liam and the way he was talking just about, thinking through the questions and how you put questions to people and how you formulate questions, not to be too clever about things, not to be trying to make it too difficult. And I think having that insider view helps you as a researcher really take on board the participants and think about their needs, so it can lead to more thoughtful research tools. And Liam's super smart, and the other peer researchers involved are super smart. Like, questions he set for Nadia today are his questions. He made those questions up. And actually, if you go on to the gallery that's been set up, which I definitely encourage you to do, you'll see there's a piece of work there called Home, which Liam actually interviewed his foster carers and his foster brother. And the questions he asked, the way he put them, I, as a researcher, I'm learning from him. So I think I'm not just saying that, like, there is a real thoughtfulness that goes into the way in which the peer researchers were taking their role. And so it means that actually when you create the interview schedules and the topic guides, they're more engaging. And that should mean then that there are more high quality interviews and data and learning. And I know the chat that I had with Celeste, she said that and the lines between, and Research Scotland talked about that actually they were getting more younger people wanting to be involved in the process. And maybe that's because they are actually getting that, these research tools and they've been so well considered, and their needs have been first and foremost throughout the process. Okay, it also makes it more likely that the barriers to engagement are identified and overcome. So, thinking through again the practicalities, thinking through, for example, if young people want to be involved in digital interviews, training them beforehand, giving that encouragement, making sure that, they know what they're doing and they're not feeling uncomfortable at any point. It increases the level of insight and meaningfulness of analysis. So even though peer researchers, not all of them want to be involved in the coding, when we brought them all together to talk through the findings and the key themes, they really, really were really invested in this. And they were saying, well, actually, what do we really want to take from this? So, for example, one of the things was they were saying, there's a law now. Well, we were saying there's a law now about sibling contact. And they were saying, well, yeah, that's the law. But actually, what are the methods to make sure that that's actually going to happen? And so it means that the analysis has this insider view that actually is invaluable, and it makes it real life, so that the recommendations that you then put forward are grounded in actually what's happening in real life. The peer researchers also, I think Ian talked about this to Liam, about the growth and confidence. And what we saw throughout this process, and was actually a really beautiful thing to see, is them moving from, just talking about their experiences to actually, right, what do we want to do in order to affect change? How do we want our voices to be heard? And they become advocates in their own right, which is a really powerful and amazing thing to see. So you see that there are some really important and tangible benefits to a participatory evaluation approach. So next, I'm going to talk about some recommendations on how to get the best outcomes from taking this approach. So what are the recommendations? Well, it's about adopting an ethics of care, which is our sort of fancy way of saying it's Gilligan. It comes from like feminist kind of research ethics. It's this idea actually that what you try to do is be sensitive to the needs of those who are involved. You prioritize them and just being caring, just being thoughtful, just thinking through all the other things that exist in their life. And you're not there to fix that, but you are there to help maybe make those steps to engagement possible. And if you don't consider those, then they actually act as barriers. It's about being inclusive. And Celeste said at the very start of this, it's about meeting peer researchers where they are. And I think that's really key to this. It's not about where you want them to be. It's about where they are. It's not about what you want them to do. It's about what they want to do. And so therefore, you need to be flexible in your approach, as opposed to this all or nothing. And as I say, I know the coding was one thing, but like just things come up in people's lives that, maybe they weren't able to do certain aspects of the project. And, there were two peer researchers, for example, that had real life struggles happening. And so we weren't able to say that they had to commit this amount of time to doing these things at this time. But we said, well, why don't you use your time to tell your story in a different way? So using music, creative writing, so they could use it in their own time. So it's about being flexible. It's about being creative, and it's about being inclusive. This word fun keeps coming up, and it sounds really not fun when you say it like that. But actually, one of the things we recognize, and I think Liam definitely, I'm sure, will want to mention this at some point, but it's just recognize actually the people who you're talking to are young people, and even adults. We all want to have fun. So it was even small things like there was a group activity, for example, one of the organizations was organizing, and they let us see what the running order of things were for the day. And Liam immediately was like, you can't just go straight into the work. You should have an icebreaker. You should have a way of settling people in. And with that on board, it's also about ensuring there's sufficient time for peer researchers to settle, discover their role, and make connections. Not everybody knows what research is, for example. So it's just making sure the training is there, that people know what their role is about, what the expectations are. And I mentioned before about the wider context. What are the safeguards that you have in place? Recognize that some of the interviews might be triggering for people. What are the trauma awareness training that you have? And we all did the NHS free training online. And I would definitely recommend that. And it's just about basically making you more aware about the things that you could be doing to make the whole experience more comfortable for everybody. It's about being realistic also about your role as professionals. So as I said before, you're not there to fix everything. You're there to ensure that if they do need help, they're signposted on. You're working alongside their trusted networks to ensure that there's clear communication throughout, and being clear about boundaries. So in almost all of the cases for the 4 peer researchers we worked with, this was their first time working in a professional capacity. So we needed to make sure that that was how they, they knew that that was the interactions they were having. But it is about, if things are coming up, to be responsive. And that's about playing a supportive role in their lives, but appropriately so. And the last thing I would say in terms of the recommendations is that the creative approaches really ensure that broad and inclusive engagement. So I mentioned briefly about creative writing, about the use of music. Liam really enjoyed metaphors, photography. So it's about helping people find their interest, and making it fun, and using that interest basically to tell their story if they want to tell their story, or to input as they want to input. Okay, so that's some of our recommendations. We also thought it might be useful to produce some handy top tips, which we have developed to make peer research and participatory evaluation possible. So, and there's no real order to this, it's just how I was able to shift them onto the slides. So budgeting is the first thing I would say, though. Budgeting appropriately for the level and types of engagement that you're able to have. So as I said before, it doesn't have to be all or nothing. So even if you want peer researchers to comment on the topic guides, that's a small part, but it can be really key. It's about giving peer researchers a monthly wage if you're going to have them involved in the whole project, so they have clear expectations of their time. If it's going to be a small chunk of time, be clear about that and pay them appropriately, at least living wage. Relationships, be prepared to really listen to what the peer researchers have to say and take their advice on board. And Liam talked about that, about the champions board, really listening. Strive to achieve the upper rungs on the participation ladder. And HEART has this 8-step ladder. At the very top, the peer researchers are owning, delivering, doing everything. The worst thing you can do is being tokenistic. So if you don't have the real capacity to do this in a meaningful way, don't do it at all. In that, if you're not going to listen, don't do it at all. But I would say if you can include and do it, but do it with the right intentions. Don't just say this to tick a box. It's about being flexible, presenting different stage involvement as choices, not all or nothing, recognizing the benefits of bringing people together that have shared experience. Unfortunately, with this project, because the restrictions, we weren't able to do that much. But when we did, it was magic, actually. And I think they all really loved it. Be empathetic, responsive to change, and prioritize inclusivity, and also end in contact sensitively. We do these projects, and actually end in contact can sometimes be the thing that people forget. But if you've been having that intense working relationship with somebody for quite a while, it's important that you end that engagement incrementally. And also, ideally, if there's any opportunities coming up or things in the up ahead, that you bring those people back on board when you can, and again, appropriately and responsibly. Some of our top tips are also outlining the importance of the scaffolding or enabling factors that make peer research and participatory evaluation possible. And I've used those words because they're in the promise. I think they're really important for us to take forward. Recruit through trusted networks, which I've mentioned before. Be realistic and clear about the level of involvement and responsibilities of peer researchers. Follow through always on what you said you're going to do. Address potential barriers. So, for example, as soon as the pandemic hit, Media Education sourced all of the laptops. They trained people in doing Zoom and getting selfie sticks so that they could even do filming on their own, things like that. So be responsive and understand what the barriers are. And that's also by having a good relationship. So people are revealing that throughout. Refer to and treat peer researchers as colleagues, and provide training, as I mentioned before, about ethics. And I think this is really important. People with lived experiences, this kind of emphasis on them telling their story, but actually they shouldn't have to ever tell their story if they don't want to. They should be treated as experts who are drawing on their experience to help inform the research inquiry. And bringing trauma awareness to the work is really important. And again, I mentioned before about recognizing this could be triggering for people. And finally, using the arts as a way of helping people to engage, to share their views, learn new skills, and have fun.